be here tonight, and thank you, Fatima. You know, the National Women's Law Center Gala is always a very special chance to come together to highlight the important work that the NWLC does in strengthening opportunities for girls and women in America. But tonight's dinner is particularly meaningful because it's also a chance to celebrate the work of Nancy Duff Campbell and Marcia Greenberger. Marcia and Duffy are fierce advocates for women and girls, and they have done a remarkable job shaping this organization into a powerful force for good. They have been on the front lines of many important fights. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, yes. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act, yes. Strengthening Civil Rights Act, the tax and welfare benefits for single mothers, protections for students and service members from sex discrimination, both at school and at work. Their work has helped make real change. And tonight, we all have an opportunity to say a very big thank you to both of them. So thank you. Yep. I also wanted to be here tonight to welcome Fatima to her new role. She has been a strong advocate for women and girls at NWLC for over a decade, and now she's going to continue that important work as she steers this organization going forward. So I look forward to continuing our work together. We're going to rock on. So way to go, Fatima. And I got one more I got to say before I get totally wound up here. And I know, I care about this stuff. I want to acknowledge the co-chairs of tonight's event, Alex Dimitrov and Governor Deval Patrick. You know, it is yes, thank you guys. It's especially great to see Governor Patrick here. You know, he is my governor, or was, and always will be. You know, come on, I'm sorry. Once you fall in love with a governor, that's it, you know. You're just kind of a one-woman governor, you know. But Deval is a man who speaks from the heart and who fights for what he believes in. There is no better partner for working families anywhere in America. Thank you, Deval. Thank you. So, I am really glad to be here tonight with all of you because the issues that the National Women's Law Center focuses on are deeply personal to me. And Fatima told just a little bit of the story, but I really wanted to tell you why the work of the NWLC matters so much to me. I grew up in a family in Oklahoma, and we were one of those paycheck to paycheck families, the kind just barely hanging on to our place in the middle class. And when I was growing up, the path was very different for boys and for girls in America. Expectations were very different. Opportunities were very different. Back then, it was a world where most women stayed home, and little girls could do almost anything they wanted, so long as what they wanted to do was be mommies, nurses, or teachers, and nothing else. And I still remember, it was in second grade when Mrs. Lee told me that I could be a teacher, and God bless her, I said that's what I was going to do, and it changed my life. Now, all three of my older brothers, I have three much older brothers, I came along many years later. My mother always referred to me as the surprise. I was about 30 before it hit me what that meant. I thought surprises were good things. Yay! That's a whole different story. But all three of my older brothers went off to the military, and that was, they didn't graduate from college. That was their chance to build a future, their ticket to the middle class. But if I wanted to teach, I needed a college diploma. And it is a long and complicated story, including getting married at 19, dropping out of school. Man, was I smart at 19. But here's the key on that story. I grew up back when America was building more chances. Not just first chances, but second chances. And for me, that second chance was a commuter college that cost $50 a semester. I understood, yeah, that was that America. And I understood what it meant to get a second chance, and you better believe, once I got it, I hung on for dear life. And 2 years later, I graduated. I can still remember the first day of school as a special needs teacher. You know, the classroom's all shined up and ready to go. There were cheerful pictures that I'd hung on the wall. The children were all ready for a new adventure. I loved that job. I truly loved that job. But by the end of the school year, I was pretty obviously pregnant. And the principal did what I think a lot of principals did back then. He wished me good luck, and he didn't ask me back for the next year and hired someone else for the job. And I stayed home, and I tried desperately to be a good wife and mother, but I really wanted to do something more. So I came up with this plan to go back to school, and this time I found a law school that was nearby. Now, I cannot describe to you how crazy the idea was of my going to law school. My mother said many, many times, very loudly, that she thought I was jeopardizing my marriage. My brothers, all three of them, just thought I was plain nuts. And my then husband smiled indulgently, making it clear that he knew I could not possibly pull this off. But I bowed my head, I pushed on. You might say, nevertheless, I persisted. But I was determined. And so I took all the needed exams, I filled out the application, I budgeted and figured out how I could pay the $450 tuition. I worked out the commute in my trusty blue Volkswagen, and I had it all figured out, all of it, until I hit the one big boulder that nearly crushed me: childcare. My daughter Amelia was about to turn 2, and if I wanted to go to law school, I needed childcare. And I know it sounds like I wasn't very smart, but I hadn't really realized exactly how hard that was going to be. You know, I visited all kinds of places, I went everywhere, and I struck out everywhere. They cost a fortune, or they smelled funny, or the kids looked miserable. And this went on for weeks. And it's getting to be the end of the summer, and I'm starting to sweat. We were bearing down on the start of school, and I knew that if I couldn't get childcare worked out, my idea of going back to school was over before it started. And finally, less than 1 week before classes were starting, I found a place that seemed nice. Cheerful teachers, a good playground, smelled good. That thing matters, you know? There was only one problem. They only took children who were dependably potty trained. Man, I filled out that application. I said, sure, dependably potty trained. Got it. We are so on this. And I left there knowing I had 5 days to turn my not quite 2-year-old into a ready-to-go, dependably potty-trained partner. And I just want to say that I am here today courtesy of 3 bags of M&Ms and a cooperative 2-year-old who loved chocolate. That's my story. Man, you know, I gotta say, going to law school and trying to raise a toddler, it wasn't always easy. But actually, it was a really special time. Amelia and I, we were buddies. You know, we both had backpacks, and she allowed me to believe that a life that combined the inside and the outside, family and not family, could actually work. Now, we made it through 3 years of law school, and by the time I graduated from law school, I was hugely pregnant with baby number 2. And by now, I was actually starting to think about career choices after law school, but law firms at this point were barely crossing the line to hire women. And hugely pregnant women were not on the recruitment list. Everyone smiled, no one said a word, and no one invited me back for a second interview. So, baby was born, I stayed home. Eventually, I got a job teaching at a law school. And when I got that job, I was beyond excited. I was back in the classroom. This time, the kids were taller. I didn't decorate the classroom with pictures of animals, but I still loved it. I loved every single minute of it. But what was going on in my life outside the classroom was not going so well. I had been teaching for just a few weeks when the babysitter quit. And from then on, I was just on the treadmill. We cycled through one child care arrangement after another, and every transition sent me into a near panic. Every time, it represented a failure. And one night, after I'd put both the kids to bed, my 78-year-old Aunt B called, long distance from Oklahoma, to just see how I was doing. And I said, sure, I'm fine. I'm doing okay, I'm fine. And in the middle of a sentence, I just started to cry. And once I started, I could not stop. I was failing. I was failing my kids, I was failing my family, I was failing my teaching. I was doing laundry at 11 o'clock at night and class preps after midnight. And I felt like I was always behind. And then I said something that shocked me when I said it. I told Aunt B I was going to quit my job, my beloved teaching job. It's like it just fell out of my mouth. Aunt B's waiting on the other end, long distance. She waits for me to quit crying, waits for me to blow my nose, get a drink of water, and then she very matter-of-factly said, I can't get there tomorrow, but I can come on Thursday. And she arrived with 7 suitcases and a Pekingese named Buddy and stayed for 16 years. I'm a United States Senator today, in part because my Aunt B rescued me on that Thursday in 1979. Without child care, I was a goner. And I know how lucky I was because so many working moms don't have an Aunt B with a dog named Buddy who can fly in and help out. Now, lots of things have changed since the days when I headed off to school. And a lot of things have changed since I started out as an assistant professor in law. There are a lot more women attending college, a lot more women in the workforce, a lot more women in corner offices, a lot more women in operating rooms, a lot more opportunities, and we celebrate those opportunities. But we also know that there are still plenty of obstacles facing working women, especially women with young children. And the challenge of finding reliable, affordable child care is a huge boulder wedged firmly between women and a million opportunities out there. Yep. It is a big obstacle. Take a look at the basics. Tens of millions of families, ordinary, hardworking families, simply don't have enough money to make it to the end of the month. I'm not talking about enough money for fancy vacations or a new pair of sneakers. I'm talking about families don't have enough money for housing and food and transportation. They don't have enough money to cover health care and education. And on top of all that, they don't have enough money for the child care they need so they can go to work and try to make some more money. Now, over the past generation, from 1970 to 2015, wages have effectively remained flat, while the costs of all kinds of basic expenses have gone up. Housing costs have risen by 50%. Health insurance expenses have doubled. College degree costs more than tripled, and those are all huge increases. But the cost of childcare, it has gone up nearly 1,000%. 1,000%. In nearly half of all states in America, child care costs are higher than the cost of an in-state public college tuition. That is a giant boulder that rolls across right in front of working women and families all across this country. And for single parents and for parents working near the bottom of the income scale, the cost of childcare often stretches families' paychecks past the breaking point. Think about the consequences of these skyrocketing childcare costs. Today, about 2/3 of mothers of small children have jobs. That's millions of mamas scrambling to make sure that someone is taking care of the baby while they head off to work. High child care costs limit career opportunities for those women, especially for single moms. They put economic pressures on families by making it tougher to save money for retirement or for a home. And they force families to make difficult compromises on the quality of the care that they can afford. You know, there is a lot of research showing that high-quality early education helps kids succeed in school and helps them do better in life. It can be a powerful tool to close the achievement gap, but skyrocketing costs often mean that families have to settle for lower quality care. And for some parents, that trade-off is really grim. Unlicensed care, a home where several children are parked in front of a television set all day, a relative who really isn't up to the task of keeping up with a 2-year-old. Families do the best they can under difficult circumstances. And even if a family can pay, care often isn't available. Try finding child care for a 6-month-old, or for a child with special needs, or a place that isn't 40 minutes from home, or a place that's open early enough that you can get to your job by 8 o'clock in the morning, or open late enough that if you get caught in traffic or an emergency comes up, you know your kid is somewhere safe. About half of all Americans today live in a child care desert. And this disproportionately affects families of color and low-income families who have the most to gain if mom can get a decent job. The fact is that even as expectations and opportunities for women in the workforce have shifted in so many ways for the better, child care in America remains an enormous roadblock. Compared to the rest of the developed world, the United States significantly underinvests in child care programs. Preschool enrollment in America is much lower, and the average teacher-to-child ratio much higher. It is time for America to step up on this. Last month, I joined with several of my Democratic colleagues in Congress to support the Child Care for Working Families Act. This has been led by Senator Patty Murray from Washington and Congressman Bobby Scott from Virginia. Now, this legislation would create a partnership between states and the federal government to ensure that no low-income or middle-class family pays too much of their income on child care, regardless of the number of children that they have. It is a step toward making child care and early education more affordable for working families who need it most. And I just want to shout out how much we appreciate the NWLC's support of this legislation. They're the one giving it momentum, and Congress should pass it now. Can we all just be clear on that? Go get them. And there's more we could do. You know me, I never come with just one ask. Consider scheduling. Think about this one for a minute. Half of all low-wage workers have little or no say over when they work. And an estimated 20 to 30% are in jobs where they can be called in to work extra hours at literally the last minute. Just think of how much of a challenge it is to plan for anything, like doctor's visits or going back to school or a second job, or yes, childcare, without even knowing when you'll be working next week. So I've introduced the Schedules That Work Act in the Senate to put some basic fairness into scheduling. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, the best, has introduced the legislation in the House. You know, this is a bill that will help working families, and especially lower wage and minimum wage workers. And again, NWLC has been right there alongside me and alongside Rosa on this bill from the very beginning, and I am very grateful for that. We're going to get this done together, Fatima. We're going to do this. So that's two, but I got to have three. These are good steps, they are, but it's time to be bold. Think of it this way. America has agreed that every 5-year-old should have access to a neighborhood school that will provide a safe place and be there 5 days a week, and will teach that child to read and write and add numbers and take turns and not to hit their neighbors. We've got plenty of work to do to make sure that our public schools are providing real opportunities for all our children. But that's the basic goal. We've all agreed on the target. I believe that same kind of opportunity should be available to 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds and all our children and all their families. Yeah. It's a big goal. But no one builds a future without investment. Whether you and I have small children or not, we have an interest in the future of this country. And that means we have an interest and a responsibility to invest in America's children. And that means making sure that their teachers and their caregivers are adequately paid and adequately trained. We don't climb up on someone else's backs. And it means making sure that when parents are working, their children are safe and loved and learning and growing. So this is how I see it. Until we decide, until all of us decide, men and women, married and single, black and white, old and young, that we are willing to invest more in all our children, then we cannot build a country in which women have equal opportunity to build a future. That's how I see it. So that's why I wanted to be here tonight. I wanted to be here tonight because I believe in change. And I believe that the energy to make these changes will come from people like you, people who fight for equality every day. And most importantly, the energy will come from many people all across this country who have joined this fight and made it part of their lives. The day after President Trump's inauguration, you all remember that day, right? No, I remember the day of the inauguration. But I remember the day after. And I went to Boston Common for the Women's March. Anybody in here go to the Women's March? So I gotta tell you, in Boston, we know how to do a Women's March. We had about 175,000 people who showed up. at Boston Common. In fact, our march was so big for the space available that the marching part of it consisted of clearing a little space in front of a few people so we could march a few steps. And then finally we all just gave up and hugged each other, and that was the end of it. But I want to tell you what it was like. It was an amazing moment, because I look out and here's just this sea of people and women, many of them wearing pink pussy hats, right? And waving handmade signs. And one of my favorites is I saw a little girl who's riding on her daddy's shoulders. And she had this hand-lettered sign, and I know she made it. And the reason I know is because it had a lot of glitter on it. Glitter and rainbows and horsies. And right in the middle, as she's waving it up on her daddy's shoulders, her sign said, "I fight like a girl." And I thought, me too, sweetie. That's where our Army's coming from. And that's it. That is our Army. And that's how we'll fight for a level playing field for boys and girls, for men and women. And that's how we will win. So, to every one of you, thank you for being part of this fight. We're going to win. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.